As the Money Burns is an original podcast by Nikki Woodard. Based on historical research, this is a deep exploration into what happened to a set of actual heirs and heiresses to some of America's most famous fortunes when the Great Depression hits. Each episode has 3 primary sections. Section 1 is a narrative story. Section 2 goes deeper into the historical facts. Section 3 focuses on contemporary, emotional, and personal connections. Story recap. Barbara Hutton and Prince Alexis Mdivani have a civil ceremony, while other Mdivani marriages implode. Now back to As the Money Burns. Eastern Rites, Part 2 of 2. This episode is dedicated to my mother. A large crowd gathers for a fairy tale royal wedding. But will the honeymoon have a happy ending? Part 2 of 2. Section 1. Story. Part 2. Continued. Love is definitely in the air this nuptial season. The flurry and buzz of excitement mixes with the various scents floating amongst the roses in the Luxembourg garden or carried in the breeze from the lime trees along the Champs-Élysées. A refreshing distraction from a world amidst the throes of the Great Depression. It is only fair people want a distraction from their troubles by momentarily fantasizing once again, even if only vicariously, about pleasures such as romance. There is plenty of negativity already, and as always there are attempts to thwart or diminish another's happiness. How cruel life can endlessly be. Thursday, June 22nd, 1933, Paris. A trail of broken hearts already lead up to and away from the altar. But today, 3,000 gather at what hopes is a fairy tale come true. The marriage of the slightly chubby, budding fashionista heiress Barbara Hutton and the formerly impoverished and dispossessed Russian Prince Alexis Mdivani. Police security tries to manage the situation. From the grand Alexander Nevsky Cathedral entrance, a red carpet is covered under a flower-lined golden red canopy, which the ruggedly handsome Prince Alexis gave to the church for this occasion. Only 8 minutes before the ceremony, Prince Alexis appears with Georgian minister Araki Chenkeli. Alexis is dressed in a swallowtail coat, striped pants, and pearl and diamond stickpin. One remarks that the prince looks more like a dapper gangster than a royal. Outside, the crowd consists mostly of females, young French women and shopgirls dreaming of better lives. Police try to restrain overly eager ladies trying to get a glimpse of the bride. Reporters and cameramen do their best to document all they can. Arriving in her father's limousine 10 minutes after the ceremony was scheduled to begin, Barbara and her father, Franklin Hutton, step out with big smiles, both suppressing the rage still seething from the fight only moments earlier when he told his daughter her fairy tale moment will be her ruination. Franklin appears in a morning coat and striped pants with a top hat. Mentally, he tallies all the wasted extravagances as he must sign the checks for nearly $150,000. Today, in 2024, that would be $3.6 million. He pays for everything from her trust fund account since his daughter remains a legal minor for a few more months until this upcoming November. No matter what he says, today is her day. Fashionable Barbara wows the crowd in a heavy ivory cream satin gown with huge puff sleeves, lace details, fashioned in a Russian Renaissance style by French designer Jean Patou. A 3.8-foot train trails behind her, managed by a special servant called a beadle, himself wearing a sword and gold chain. On top of her head sits a horseshoe tiara of gold and tortoiseshell studded with diamonds. Her antique lace veil is made from a Woolworth family heirloom. She carries no flowers. Alexis meets Barbara at the front of the church, and she follows behind him towards the altar, as is the Eastern Orthodox custom. The church itself has a large mosaic gold dome and stained glass windows trailing in the sunlight. Lilies, hydrangeas, roses, gardenias, and other flowers fill the room. Their sweet fragrances combine with incense. Along with a large bronze candelabra, hundreds of candles light the church. Many in the congregation nearly faint from the intense heat as they stand with no seats available for the nearly 45-minute-long ceremony. Inside the church, 3 cameras snap away documenting the occasion. Playing up the royal theme and distinguishing from the guests, servants dressed like admirals in knee breeches, plumed hats, and long swords as they greet the 800 elite guests, including boulevardier Barry Wall and film star Lily Damita. The most distinguished guest is the Indian Maharaja of Kapurthala in a purple turban. Other attendants for the ceremony too dress in breeches with gold chains around their necks. 4 priests serve throughout the ceremony, 2 Russian and 2 Georgian in shimmering gold robes encrusted with diamonds. The dean of the Russian clergy, the archpriest Jacob Smirnov, leads them with his long white beard hanging over his Greek Orthodox clergy gold vestments. Expanded from the usual 9 to 30 by Alexis's request, a Russian choir is led by Monsieur Afonsky, who sings the bridal anthem as Barbara walks behind the prince down the aisle towards the altar. Both bride and groom carry lit candles throughout the ceremony. Prince Alexis joins his best man, Felipe de Rivas, otherwise known as Felipe Rodriguez de Rivas y Diaz Arazo, the future 5th Conde de Castilla de Guzman. Yes, that's right, in other words, brother of Alexis' former fiery forbidden lover, now Countess Silvia de Rivas de Castellan. The bride is unattended, as custom dictates. However, reports still indicate that her bridesmaids are none other than childhood friend and classmate Jane Alcott, secretary and recent traveling companion to the Orient Jean Morley Kinnerly, and none other than Countess Henry de Castellan, Silvia de Rivas, who is in fact Barbara's best friend and despite being the prince's former lover encourages the relationship and marriage, and whose brother also serves as the best man. Missing from this group is the richest girl in the world, heiress Doris Duke, who is not participating despite earlier speculations. 4 immaculately groomed young Russians with silk hats stand behind the groom, while 4 others likewise stand behind the bride. Serving as ushers, Barbara's 3 cousins, the flamboyantly gay James Jean Donahue, already tipsy from the 6 brandy Alexanders prior to the service, his brother Woolworth Woolley Donahue, and Fraser McCann. Other ushers noted are French historian René de la Croix de Castries, also translated as Count Renaud Saint-Croix, Victor Grandpère, Christian Dufort, publisher and Barbara's other recent traveling companion to the Orient, Morley Kinnerly, Paris opera dancer Sergei Lafar, and Prince Theodore of Russia, also known as Prince Fyodor Alexandrovich Romanov, nephew of the last Romanov Tsar, Nicholas II, and brother-in-law of the man credited with killing Rasputin. Also mentioned as ushers, though may have been only guests, Park Avenue lad and one of Barbara's most ardent former paramours and son of a Broadway star, James Blakely, and Marshall Hemingway of New York, the latter who happens to be son of an ex-Follies girl, Laura Dolly Hemingway Fleischman O'Brien, and now stepson to none other than Mae Murray's second ex-husband, former polo star and Olympian Jay O'Brien. Mae is currently in the process of divorcing her 4th husband, Alexis's brother, Prince David Mdivani. Such a strange assortment of exes in attendance. The head priest takes the gold crown and touches 3 times each of the bride and prince's heads, then hands the crowns to the ushers who will hold them above the couple's heads in 5-minute shifts for the next 30 minutes. Throughout the ceremony, Barbara's beautiful, deep blue eyes mist up. The couple kneel on pillows before the priest. Kiss icons. The bride agrees to obey. In the ceremony, the archpriest refers to them as king and queen. The couple takes communion of sacred wine from the same gold cup. Then the priest binds their hands with a rose-colored handkerchief 3 times around the wrist, then holds his hand over theirs. Next, while holding the rings, he leads them around the altar 3 times. To signify marriage should be endless circles. The rings are to be placed on the 4th finger of the right hand. The priest asks the bride twice if she has changed her mind. Both times she firmly answers, "No." At some point, the priest asks if they had ever promised this love to anyone else before. They both answer, "No." Disregarding former wife Louise Van Allen? Or the other exes in attendance? The couple simultaneously steps to a small red silk rug before a table to signify that authority in the home will be equally divided. However, the prince sneakily declares himself boss of the family by touching his foot on the rug a split second before Barbara's. The ceremony ends with the couple kneeling in prayer. At last, they give a chaste kiss. Unlike many of their more passionate and lustier ones shared prior, and likely thereafter. Bread and salt are placed in their hands before they leave the church and again when they enter the later reception to indicate they shall always have abundance. Barbara is quite weakened by the end and a little wobbly. They emerge from the church smiling happily, flushed and fatigued. As they leave the church, the outside crowd excitedly breaks the police line and touches Barbara, almost crushing her, mussing up her dress, stepping on the train, knocking the crown off her head, which is quickly retrieved. A few fights break out on the outer perimeters. Remember, these are young ladies. Police form a wedge around the couple to aid them into the automobile. It takes nearly 20 minutes to reach the vehicle. Then they are still not safe. The car is surrounded by so many people that it gets pushed a block before the chauffeur dares to start it. The crowds are thick and heavy as an elderly woman tries to make her way through the crowd, begging, "S'il vous plaît, s'il vous plaît, please let me through, please let me through. I have brought her up since the age of 5. Could it be that Barbara's beloved surrogate mother, French governess Germaine Tiki-Toke, did not join the regular family entourage? The bridal party makes its way to the Hotel Rites for the brilliant reception where scores of personages from international society circles attend. In non-prohibition Paris, champagne and caviar are served. The reception is supposed to be rather demure since the prince remains in mourning over his father's recent April death. For the first dance, the dashing prince twirls his bride across the floor. Then comes the one enviable moment that fellow heiresses, Louise Van Allen and Doris Duke, will never get to experience. The one thing money can never buy. Franklin secures the second dance with his daughter, who is too delighted in her own moment to worry about their earlier fight. There she informs him that she is gifting him $5 million, $120 million today, for his astute handling of her finances. The fortune he doubled to nearly $50 million, which now in 2024 would be the equivalent of $1.2 billion. He worries all the rest of it will go down the Mdivani drain. The third dance is with cousin Jim. He begs to join her honeymoon for fun, but Barbara worries that might be too much too soon. However, Jim is one of her few lifelines and can always cheer her up, so they agree he might join them in Venice. After the last toast, Prince Alexis returns to his separate hotel room at the Maurice Hotel, only 2 blocks from the Ritz. He walks around in his BVDs and socks, preparing to change into traveling clothes when there is a knock on his door. Mistaking it as his valet, he opens the door to be confronted by 2 process servers. Long ago, Alexis continued to run up a tab at the Van Allen brothers' tailor in London. Angered by how their former schoolmate, friend, and decades-long leech first seduced, then discarded their beloved younger sister, Louise, James Henry Van Allen and William Sam Van Allen hired a French lawyer to recover the $5,000 owed, roughly $120,000 today, more as a practical joke than the actual need for financial compensation. By now, the brothers may have already forgotten about the debt. Meanwhile, watching all the press coverage, their lawyer picks this moment at the most inconvenient time for the prince to enact their revenge. In knickers and way past the bank's closing times, Alexis scrambles to find the money. Luckily, his new alliance to one of the proudest American industrial aristocracy, Barbara, quickly forks over the needed payment so they can continue on their way. Spoiling his mood, the groom does not seem to have taken the joke so humorously. Back at the Rites, Barbara does several interviews where she admits to knowing the prince since she was a 15-year-old girl, all the while claiming he was her best friend who listened to all her fears and troubles with a caring ear. As the couple heads to the train, Barbara coos those damning words. It's going to be fun being a princess. They depart in the evening on the Midnight Express for their honeymoon. 13 trunks with princess crowns above her initials follow the bride to her honeymoon destination. Much has been written over the 40-plus new outfits she had specially made for her new status. Also, she carries an extensive collection of over 100 music albums. They will go to Italy at Lake Como, Venice, and Lido on to St. Moritz, then Barcelona, and lastly, Biarritz, before settling back in Paris while intending to spend much of their time traveling abroad. Inside their private rail car, Alexis stares blankly out the window as the landscape rushes by. Nervously, Barbara floats about in her flesh-colored chiffon lingerie nightdress embroidered with the Mdivani coronet. Ready to be ravished, she smiles lovingly and lustily at her handsome, athletic husband. Coming over to the bedside, he instead looks at her board and utters contemptuously, "Barbara, you are too fat." Section 2, History and Historiography. Details, details, details. I am forever and endlessly seeking out details. Barbara Hutton has 4 biographies written decades later, along with 2 more contemporary multi-article series from the mid to later 1930s. Thus, each book might have maybe 2 chapters detailing her first marriage and not more than 4 pages on their wedding. The 2 newspaper series might have a few paragraphs or possibly 1 dedicated article on the relationship with barely a paragraph or even a sentence referencing the wedding. From one source to another, information changes. Sometimes the interpretation or perspective changes. Her first marriage with Prince Alexis Mdivani is only a small slice within her whole life. It gets some attention, but spoiler alert, this definitely won't be her only matrimonial endeavor. And therefore, this marriage is always rushed and minimized, especially within any documentary, despite a shorter or longer length. And yet for my podcast, I want to focus on this one. Why? Because the first love, marriage, heartbreak, is the one that sets the course of life. Yes, we should be able to change or outgrow that. But inevitably, it is the early life experiences that get set in stone within one's own personality. As I have explained prior, I have constructed the timeline of this tale through multiple biographies and supplemented and fleshed out details primarily through newspaper research. In the earlier sections, the stories were a bit more scattered. For the best, there might be 4 or 5 articles that then spread in syndication would amount to about 15 to 30 articles. Each one I would skim through to catch 1 or 2 extra details. Now, all along the way, Barbara's biographies talk about all the press attention she got. But I wasn't finding it so far. I mean, after her 1930 debutante ball, she got a little more coverage, and over this last year, 1932, a little increase, but nothing too significant. But then the scandal involving Alexis Mdivani and his first wife, Louise Van Allen, really spiked up interest by November 1932. Yet still somewhat manageable until now. For around a 7 to 10 day period around the Mdivani Hutton wedding alone, there are over 3,000 potential articles. Many are duplicates for sure. But the cup runneth far over. Even when I reduce terms for specific details, I can still have hundreds, up to mid-200 to 500 articles easily. And every detail is spilled over and over. I try to remove and reduce speculation to get the actual details of what happened by focusing on articles the day of or immediately after the event. Though I was quite surprised that on June 17, 1933, a whole 3 days before the civil ceremony, which occurred on June 20th, 1933, much of the planned details are already published for the upcoming event's both civil and religious weddings. Rereading the sections over and over, and once again, I return to the wedding and honeymoon. One biography, Poor Little Rich Girl, the most problematic one, both due to plagiarism and blatant fabrications, actually is the one source, ironically, to detail accurately parts of the wedding. Likely, that author did more thorough newspaper research than the other 3. The other bios reference the weddings in more general details that have become quite fuzzy with the passage of time. Thus, I'm giving every possible detail just in case, because if remotely true or even just speculated, there are some pretty mind-blowing possibilities behind those details. I can't solidly guarantee who or what, because almost none of the details are the same across all sources. Thus, I will favor more the news articles as likely to be more accurate by factual information, as all the books are written decades later. Such as one bio, Poor Little Rich Girl, inaccurately claims Barbara stepped on the rug first to become boss in the relationship, while several news sources document it was indeed the prince instead who had stepped first. And trust me, they were paying attention to who stepped first. The books, however, illustrate the emotional remnants and dynamics of the situation not present in news articles. And still, this time, there is so much information it is hard to determine what exactly is true or not. Did recently discarded former beau James Blakely attend the wedding and likely participate as an usher? That would be crazy. But then again, so is the presence of Silvia de Rivas de Castellan and her brother Felipe de Rivas de Castilla de Guzman. As for the honeymoon night, that is documented in only 3 bios, 2 of which published after her death. 2 of the bios indicate the prince's fat comment happened on the train. They are the scathing earlier bio, Barbara Hutton by Jennings, and Poor Little Rich Girl, which, reminder, plagiarized heavily from another bio, $1 Million Baby, which actually states the comment occurs later in St. Moritz. I chose the train. The tailor's debt comes from one good source detailing the Mdivani siblings and Louise, which I have yet to name. I need to protect some of my sources, though it too has trouble with accuracy involving actual facts, but the author is a close witness to events and knows many of the players involved. Furthermore, I am finding information that expands beyond what has been continuously written in the past and giving fresh and vibrant details and relational dynamics. In all but one of the bios and both article series, as well as any documentary, heavily favor and are limited to Barbara's perspective. some things don't seem to change. Fascination with the wealthy, like modern celebrity, brings a lot of attention, especially to events like big, elaborate weddings. The July 2024 $600 million Mumbai wedding of Anand Ambani and Radhika merchant being the most recent example. Always plenty of news and speculation to go around. Section 3. Contemporary and Personal Relevance. The dream scenario. There are few anticipated moments where we fantasize to a fairy tale type level. A special event and one that is likely to be able to happen. For guys and some gals, it might be a game, a big presentation, a great adventure, maybe a honeymoon. For most females, the big event will definitely require special wardrobe like a dress with maybe a flower. The activity will be a big dance like prom, or in some cases, a debutante ball. And the biggest of all dreams, historically and worldwide across cultures and class distinctions, is most definitely a wedding. It's ingrained in our feminine nature. Every little girl I knew, the moment we attended our first wedding and realized all the decisions a bride gets to make, we start planning our weddings. The colors, the flowers, and fill in the groom with whoever strikes our fancy at whichever period in time. Little girls on the playground definitely and repeatedly discuss and compare details. Seriously, I was like 8 when I began debating my options. Over a decade later, my college roommate bought bridal magazines before my last year of college while she had another year to finish and well before her wedding 2 years later. In fact, she wasn't even engaged at the time. That came several months later. Such a fun conversation we had teasing her then boyfriend and would-be future fiancé at the time. It took me several more years before I had my own guy to be able to unleash my moment. And sadly, I was miserable the whole time I was planning it. Why? I was madly in love with him, and he with me, but my family was not happy at all. He had some visa issue, and as well, he was a Muslim. This is not 2 years after 9/11. We were broke and had to pay for it all ourselves. So I focused on covering only the bare basics. I went home for the wedding so I could have my family and friends, as no one was really able to travel where I was living at the time. I made some interesting choices. Invitations printed via Kinko's, used a butterfly atrium as a venue, unique enough, surprisingly affordable, non-religious, and a tax write-off as it was part of a museum. Our honeymoon was a brief trip to New Orleans, within driving distance with hopes of a larger trip once we could afford one after we straightened out his visa situation. Ironically, I bought my dress 2 months prior to engagement because it was insanely cheap and on sale. I knew the wedding, would happen the moment I was ready to say yes. Legal pressures, remember? But I made him wait a whole year to assess our compatibility. However, all my blood relatives were highly upset over this scenario. I knew once things got straightened out legally, they would accept him. That's how my family is. And they did, eventually. By the time we got to New Orleans, I was in shock, freaked out over all the sudden changes, but I settled in a little over a month later. Then it felt good to have the commitment and the hope of a better tomorrow. Which, as I've already hinted, never really came, and later ended quite darkly. Oh, dear Barbara, how I feel so bad for the girl so desperately seeking love, only to be betrayed deeply so soon after her I do. Someone should have really warned Barbara that the second part of a fairy tale generally comes with an ogre attached. Mostly an ogress mother-in-law, which means the princes are usually part ogres too. Well, Barbara won't be our only heir and heiress to struggle with their supposedly happily ever after. Alas, money can't buy everything, especially not love and happiness. This podcast has been a mainly solo endeavor in all the core work. Luckily, I have a few friends that have given me plenty of emotional support and discussed story plots along the way. But the one thing I would never be able to do is write or play music. Thus, the great fortune that one part of my podcast since the beginning has been Past Perfect Vintage Music, a digitally restored music collection from the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s. And now they have the Past Perfect Vintage Radio. It can be as simple as asking on Amazon's Alexis to turn on Past Perfect Vintage Radio. Also available on TuneIn Radio and MyTuner Radio apps. Links in the notes and transcript. If you enjoy As the Money Burns, then please share, like, and subscribe. Next, when we return to As the Money Burns, while one honeymoon falls apart, another set of bachelors appear on the matrimonial market. Until then, As the Money Burns is an original podcast written, produced, and voiced by Nikki Woodard based on historical research. Archival music has been provided by Past Perfect Vintage Music. Check out their website at www.pastperfect.com. Please come visit us at As the Money Burns via GoodPods X, formerly Twitter, Facebook, now Mado, or Instagram. Transcripts, timeline, episode guide, and character bios are available at asthemoneyburns.com.